There's a concept in every civilization that has ever reached the stars. A line, not a border, not a law, not a treaty clause buried in some council archive no one reads until it's too late. A line, the one thing specific to each species that you do not cross. Not because you'll lose the war, not because the politics will sour, but because whatever comes after crossing it, whatever wakes up on the other side of it, is something the universe was not designed to handle. The Kreth crossed that line on the fourth moon of Yela 9. I know because I was there, because I filed the incident report, because I watched the sensor feeds for 6 hours afterward and told myself I was documenting. I wasn't documenting. I was watching. I want to be precise about what I saw. Not because you need the details, though you do, but because I spent the next 4 rotations trying to convince myself I had misunderstood something. A translation error. A sensor artifact. Cultural context I lacked. I had not misunderstood anything. What the Kreth did on Yela 9 had a name in 47 languages across the Concord. In human standard, the word is genocide. What happened after it had a name in only one? The humans called it answering. I have reviewed 2,000 years of Concord conflict records. I have read accounts of the Veth expansion, the ruinous wars, the silence at Porvith. In none of them, not one, does the following sequence appear. A species receives news of their own systematic extermination, goes quiet for 11 hours, then moves, not with a declaration, not with a council vote, not with terms offered or withdrawn. They just moved. I have been asked, since then, why I continued to observe rather than evacuate. Here's my honest answer. I did not believe what I was seeing was possible, and I could not look away from something impossible. What you are about to hear is my official account of the 42 days following the Yela 9 incident. It has been reviewed, redacted in 3 places I will not specify, and cleared for distribution to Concord observers at the rank of field analyst or above. If you are below that rank and you are reading this anyway, good. You should know. The feed came through at 0340 station time, and I was on my 3rd cup of chav, which I will describe for the record as a liquid that smells like burned copper wire and tastes like a threat. I drank it constantly. Commander Thurlin had docked my performance rating twice for sleeping during briefings, so I had graduated from sleep to chav, from alertness to a sustained low-grade horror that kept my eyes open and my thinking approximately 60% functional. 60% was enough to read the feed. It was not enough to understand it. I read it twice. A 3rd time, pulled the source authentication, checked the relay chain, cross-referenced the sector designation against my charts, and confirmed, yes, Yela 9 was real, the 4th moon was real, and the population figure listed under civilian non-combatant presence was real. Had been real. I put my chav down. This is a small detail. I include it because I had not voluntarily put down a cup of chav in 4 months. My hands had developed a kind of anxious adhesion to it. The fact that I sat on the console and did not pick it up again for the next 6 hours tells you more about what I read than any figure I could quote. The Kreth had been a problem for 8 months before Yela 9. A border problem, officially. A management challenge, in a language Commander Thurlin preferred when speaking to the council liaisons who visited our station smelling of clean air and expensive cloth. They asked careful questions. He gave careful answers. I filed careful reports. The word genocide did not appear in any of them. I should have put it there. The Yela system had been a human resettlement zone. 3rd wave colonial, meaning the original generation ships had been there long enough that the people born on those moons had never seen Earth. They knew it the way I know the Concord homeworld, a word for something that lives in the past tense. Yela 9's 4th moon had a population of approximately 400,000. Agricultural, modest defense grid, no strategic value that I had been able to identify in any of my careful reports. The Kreth had identified some value I missed. The feed took 11 minutes to fully transmit. Sensor data, visual confirmation, survivor beacon logs. There were not many survivor beacon logs. I sat with it for a while. Then I opened a channel to the Human Diplomatic Attaché office because protocol required notification of affected parties, and I want to be clear, operating entirely on protocol at that moment. My brain had gone somewhere else. My hands were doing the job. The attaché on duty was a young female officer whose name I will not record here. She had been asleep. She arrived on screen with her hair at an angle that suggested she had dressed in the dark, and she looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has just been told something they already know is going to change their life. I had not said anything yet. She already had that expression. "How many?" she said. Now it happened. Not as this confirmed. Just, "How many?" I told her. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her face did something complicated and then stopped doing it, and what replaced it was nothing. Not blankness. That implies absence. This was a presence. Something had come up behind her eyes and taken position there. "Thank you, analyst," she said. The channel closed. I monitored the human diplomatic frequency for the next 11 hours. Almost nothing. Internal traffic only. Short transmissions, heavily encrypted. I caught fragments, routing confirmations, logistics queries, once what sounded like someone reading a list of numbers in a flat, methodical voice for about 40 minutes before the signal tightened, and I lost it. I flagged the traffic volume anomaly in my log. Unusual organizational activity, nature unclear. I drank chaff. I pulled up historical records on human conflict response patterns because that was my job and because I needed something to do with my hands. What I found was instructive in a way I did not immediately know how to feel about. Humans had a documented response latency. When attacked, they did not respond immediately. They went quiet first. Observers across 6 separate conflict archives had noted it and consistently misread it as confusion, grief paralysis, surrender consideration. The Veth had misread it during the expansion border skirmishes. The Drothi had misread it at Pello Station. In each case, the quiet period had lasted between 8 and 14 hours. In each case, what followed the quiet had required its own archive category. At hour 9, I started checking the long-range sensor nets. At hour 10, I started writing this log. At hour 11 and 14 minutes, the sensors registered a mass transit event at the Yella system's outer edge, ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in numbers that made my console produce a sound I had never heard it make before. A kind of strained, rising tone, like the machine was trying to say something it lacked the vocabulary for. I had never heard that alarm. I pulled up the classification index. Sensor saturation event. Vessels detected exceed classification capacity. Manual count recommended. I did not have time to do a manual count. I was already sending the alert up the chain to Commander Vetherlin, and my hands, I noticed, were not steady. I reached for my chaff. It had gone cold. I drank it cold. Vetherlin arrived on the command deck in 17 minutes, which was fast for him. He was a large being, built for patience, long-limbed, deliberate. The kind of commander who considered a 40-minute response time to be the respectful implication that he had not been asleep, but thinking. He looked at my screen. He said nothing for a long time. "How many?" he said finally. The same 2 words. Different species. Same instinct. "The sensor net can't resolve an accurate count," I said. "The array is reading the mass transit displacement as a single event." "That's not an answer." "No, sir." He stared at the saturation alert. His secondary eyelids, the ones he only deployed when he was processing something he didn't want visible on his face, flickered once, closed, stayed closed. "Give me a visual on the formation lead." I routed the feed. The ship that emerged on my screen was not a warship in any configuration I had documented in my 8 months on this posting. It was not built for speed or elegance or the particular aggressive geometry that most species adopted when they wanted something to look threatening. It was a long, dark, ugly thing. Functional the way a fist is functional. It had markings I didn't recognize along the hull, not military insignia. Something painted. Something that looked at this resolution, almost like, "Are those names?" Vetherlin said. I enhanced the feed. Names. Hundreds of them. Painted in small, dense text across the forward hull in the pale script of human standard. Dense enough that from any distance they'd look like texture, like armor plating, like nothing at all. Up close, there were lists. I had enough human standard to read the ones nearest the bow. They were not the names of soldiers. They were not the names of ships or battles or military honors. They were the names of Moon. Veth Erlin's secondary eyelids opened. "Give me the Kreth Border Command," he said. And, analyst, he stopped. "Sir." He was still looking at the screen. "At the names." "File the report," he said. "All of it. Don't use careful language." I didn't. I want to describe, with professional accuracy, what the Kreth High Command did when they received our alert. They held a council session. I know because the session request was logged through standard Concord diplomatic channels, and the timestamp is in my files. 4 hours after the sensor saturation event. 4 hours after a fleet of human vessels materialized at the yellow outer edge in numbers that broke my console's counting function. The Kreth convened a council session. I have tried, in the months since, to imagine what was said in that room. The interpretations I ran for Commander Vethurlin suggested several possibilities. Negotiation positioning, ceasefire overture, a genuine belief that what they had done on Yela 9 was a strategic action that would prompt a strategic response, something measured, something discussable, something that would eventually land on a table somewhere with representatives on both sides, and terms on paper. I think they believed they had started a war. They had not started a war. They had started something that didn't have a Concord classification yet. The first human transmission to Kreth High Command was sent at hour 14. I intercepted a copy because it was routed through the Concord relay network, and I had level 3 monitoring authority over traffic in the sector. It was brief. It identified the sender only by fleet designation. It named Yela 9's fourth moon. It named the dead, not the number. The people. There was a list. I don't know how long it was. The transmission ran for 6 minutes, and the list took up most of that. Names, rendered in human standard, one after another, in a voice that did not waver, and did not speed up, and did not slow down. Then, at the end, "We are coming to collect." That was the entirety of the message. I flagged it, submitted it up the chain. Added note, tone indicates non-negotiation posture. Recommend initiating third-party mediation channels immediately. Commander Verlin read my note, looked at me for a moment in a way that suggested he found my optimism interesting, and said nothing. The first engagement happened 31 hours after the fleet's arrival. I wasn't watching the right feed when it started. I had been trying to get sensor resolution on a secondary cluster of vessels that kept doing something I couldn't classify. They were moving in a pattern that made no tactical sense to me. Not an attack formation, not a defensive spread. Something in between, or neither, or something else entirely that my 8 months of conflict pattern analysis had not equipped me to name. I was staring at that pattern when my secondary console lit up, Kreth Outer Perimeter, Grid 7. I switched feeds. What I saw took me a moment to parse. The Kreth had a perimeter installation at Grid 7. Automated defense platforms, 3 cruisers on rotation, standard hardpoint configuration. It was a solid defensive setup. I had logged it during my border mapping work. It was the kind of installation that discouraged engagement through sheer visibility. But we have this, and you can see we have this school of deterrence. The humans had sent one ship. One small ship, a courier class hull, the kind used for fast transit and light cargo, not combat, and it had come in fast and low along the installation sensor shadow, which I had also logged in my mapping work, but which the Kreth installation apparently had not prioritized, and it had done something to the perimeter platform's targeting relay that my sensors couldn't fully resolve. The platforms went dark. Then, the 3 cruisers, deprived of targeting coordination, spent 4 minutes trying to re-establish their formation while the courier, the single, small, courier-class ship, vanished back into the sensor shadow. Then, the rest of the human fleet moved through the gap. I wrote sophisticated electronic disruption methodology in my log entry. I crossed it out. I wrote, they found the hole I found, and they used it. I had mapped that shadow 7 months ago. I had included it in a border vulnerability assessment that was reviewed by Kreth High Command's Concord Liaison Office. I did not know if they had read it. I did not know if it had informed their installation design. Based on what I had just watched, I had a theory. They had not read it. I need to describe, as precisely as I can, the next 18 hours because they're the hours that I think about most. The hours I return to when I try to understand something I am still not sure I understand. The human fleet did not punch through the gap and commit to a full engagement. That was what I expected, what every conflict pattern in my archive expected. You break the line, you pour through. They didn't pour. They sent groups. Small, varied groups. Each one doing something different. One cluster going wide around the installation debris to hit a logistics depot I hadn't known existed until their targeting made it obvious. Another cluster moving toward the Kreth's secondary communication array. Not to destroy it, I noted with confusion, but to attach something to it and then leave. The courier ship appeared twice more. Different sectors. I couldn't track how it was moving between them at that speed without flagging the FTL relay, which it wasn't using, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time convinced I was tracking two different ships before I accepted that I was watching one vessel doing something my physics education had told me wasn't practical. I added a note to my log. Review courier class, hull modifications, human military adaptation. I had been adding notes like this for 31 hours. My log was developing a second personality. What the Kreth sent in response to all of this was a full battle group. Organized, properly formidable, the kind of force that would have ended any engagement I had observed in the past 8 months before it reached the second hour. I watched the sensor feeds with my third cup of cold chaff. I want to be specific about one moment. The Kreth battle group's command vessel established firing solutions on 3 of the human clusters simultaneously. A coordinated volley that should have forced retreat or cost significant losses. This is documented. The timing is in my file. The human clusters, upon detecting targeting lock, did not retreat. They split. Not in the direction you split to avoid fire. In the direction that placed the Kreth's own logistics elements in a line of their own volley's path correction. The Kreth commander had to abort. They'd have shelled their own supply line. Vetherlin, who had been standing at my shoulder for most of this, made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind that comes out when your lungs move before your brain decides it's appropriate. They planned for that, he said. I don't know, I said. Because I didn't. That was the honest answer. I didn't know if they had planned for it specifically, or if someone had simply seen the geometry in the moment and moved and the others had followed, because that's what they do, move together, and I didn't know which of those options was more unsettling. Analyst. Sir, which of our evacuation routes does the secondary comm array cover? I checked. I felt the chav do something unpleasant in my stomach. All of them, I said. The thing attached to the Kreth's secondary communication array broadcast a single message, on loop, on every frequency the array covered. The message was the list again. The names. Playing over every Kreth military channel, every logistics frequency, every command relay. The names of Yella 9's fourth moon, for 16 hours, until the Kreth managed to physically sever the array. I have since spoken to a Kreth communications officer who was on duty during those 16 hours. She told me, and I am recording this because it matters, that after the 4th hour her crew stopped trying to block the signal and just listened. She could not explain why. I think I understand why. The names were not a weapon. They were not a threat. They were not a strategy. Technically speaking, they were a reminder, addressed not to the Kreth High Command, addressed not to the council in their session room, to every soldier, every operator, every logistics officer sitting at a relay console wondering how this war had started and what they were actually part of. This is what you did. These are the people. We have not forgotten, and we are here, and we're going to make sure you don't forget either. That was the second communication the humans sent to Kreth High Command. They never sent a third. On the 31st day, I met one of them. This happened because of a bureaucratic collision I have replayed in my head a number of times since. The kind of small accident that changes what you know about the universe and then leave you to live with it without any instruction on how. A human liaison team had been attached to our observation station for coordination purposes. Standard Concord protocol during active conflict. Neutral party stations host communication conduits. I had agreed to this with Commander Vetherlin's signature, and had then largely forgotten about it because I was spending 20 hours a day on sensor feeds and the remaining 4 hours doing something I generously called sleeping. The liaison team arrived, and I was unfortunately standing in the corridor when they came through the main lock. There were 4 of them. 3 I registered as a group. They moved the way people move when they're cataloging exits, not unconsciously, just the permanent habit of it. The 4th was ahead of the group, and she was the one I'm going to try to describe, though I want to note for the record that human description is a discipline I have not mastered. She was not large. This surprised me, though I don't know why it should have. I had reviewed enough human physical data to know they varied enormously. She was wearing the kind of clothing that had been worn until it remembered the body inside it. And she was carrying a bag that looked heavy and a cup of something that steamed and smelled from 2 meters like charcoal and old regrets. She looked like someone who had not slept in 31 days. She probably hadn't. She stopped when she saw me, because I was standing in the corridor looking at her with what I can only describe as the expression of a being who has spent a month watching someone through a camera and has now come face to face with them without any of the comfortable distance. She looked at me. Back. Straight. Not aggressive. Something more settled than aggression. Like aggression was a wardrobe she'd already gone past on the way to something with fewer buttons. Analyst, she said, reading my rank marker. Yes, I said. Rethon. Yes. Good. She took a sip of the charcoal cup. I need your sector maps. The complete set, including your border vulnerability assessments. I said without thinking. I sent those to the Kreth liaison office 7 months ago. She looked at me for a moment. Yeah, she said. I know. She walked past me. Her name was Warrant Officer Dara Solis. I will use her name now that she has given authorization for this account. She spent 11 days at our station, and during those 11 days, I spoke with her on 4 occasions of substance, plus numerous corridor incidents that she treated as conversations, and I treated as the universe giving me information I hadn't requested. The first of substance, the maps conversation above. The second, 2 days later, when I found her standing in the observation bay at 0200 station time, looking at the sensor feeds, not doing anything with them. Just looking. She had her cup, always the cup, refilled with what I eventually confirmed was something called coffee that smelled like my chav's angrier cousin, and she was standing very still. I almost left. I was there to run a routine calibration check, and she was not in my way. I didn't leave. Is it going the way you planned? I asked. She considered this with the thoroughness of someone who takes questions seriously. Parts of it, she said. Which parts? She was quiet for a moment. On the feed, a cluster of human vessels was executing a maneuver around a Kreth supply convoy that I had been trying to classify for 3 hours. The parts we planned, she said, and something at the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and less happy than a smile. I looked at the feed with her for a while. Our analysis suggested the Kreth expected a conventional response. I said, concentrated force. Defined objectives. Yeah, they prepared for that. Yeah, you didn't give them that. She looked at me sideways. The corner of her mouth again. No, she said. We didn't. I wanted to ask the question that had been sitting in my log for 31 days like an uninvited annotation. I asked it. What do you want? She looked back at the feed. We want what they took, she said. Back. You can't. I stopped. Because I knew that. She knew that. The people on Yellow 9's 4th moon were not coming back. This was a fact that required no analysis. I know, she said before I finished. The feed showed the Kreth convoy beginning an evasion pattern. Then what does that mean? I said. Back. She didn't answer for long enough that I thought she wasn't going to. It means they have to know, she said finally. They have to wake up every morning for the rest of their lives and know what they did. We're going to make it so they can't pretend they don't. She sipped her coffee. That's what back means. The third conversation was brief, and I will record it only because it contains the thing I keep returning to. I asked her, because it had been bothering me professionally, how a dispersed, multi-vector engagement sustained coherence across 30-odd days without centralized command coordination. How they did it. She looked at me like the question was slightly funny. We talk, she said. Your communications are heavily encrypted. We've been unable to not like that. She made a small gesture. We just talk. Someone sees something, they say it. Someone has a better idea, they say it. It moves. That's not. I stopped. Tried again. A chain of command, we have one. But, you just said, the chain's for when we disagree. She finished her coffee. Set the cup down. We mostly don't disagree. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I'm still thinking about it. The fourth conversation happened on her last day at the station. She found me in my console, where I always was chav adjacent, sensor adjacent, log filing, and she put something on the desk beside my cup. A small chip. Data format. Concord standard. My full operational log, she said. In case yours has gaps. I looked at it. Why? She pulled her bag up on her shoulder. Because in 40 years some analyst is going to be writing a history of this, and I want the record to be complete. She paused. I wanted to know exactly what we did and exactly why. Is that, I try to find the right word. Is that important to you? That people know why. She looked at me with the look she had used in the corridor on day one. The settled look. They called us monsters, she said. After the first week. Kreth High Command's internal communications. You probably have the intercepts. I did have the intercepts. I had filed them under psychological operations, adversarial framing. The thing about monsters, she said, is they don't explain themselves. She picked up my chav cup, looked at it with what I can only describe as appalled respect, set it back down. We're going to explain ourselves, she said. Every step, every name, every reason. We're going to be so legible that 1,000 years from now, no one in this galaxy can look at what we did and say they didn't understand it. She moved toward the door. That's the part that scares them, I think. We're not hiding. She left. I sat with that for a while. The conflict at Yellow reached what the Concord formally termed cessation of active hostilities on day 42. I will not detail the terms. They are in the public record, filed under a classification that has since been downgraded 3 levels because of what I understand is significant public interest. The short version, the Kreth agreed to terms. The terms were specific. They involved accountability structures that had no Concord precedent and will probably require their own treaty framework before the legal scholars are done with them. The names of Yellow Nine's fourth moon are part of the formal agreement. They are in the document. All of them. Listed in full. As a condition, not a preamble. As a thing, not a symbol. I reviewed the Kreth Council session that agreed to the terms. I have a transcript. 41 minutes of deliberation, which is fast for a council that spent 4 hours deliberating at the start of all this. I am not a Kreth political analyst, and I will not speculate on their internal reasoning. I will record only that the council's senior arbiter, at the end of the session, said one sentence before calling the agreement vote. They are not going to stop. Not we cannot win. Not the terms are acceptable. Not any of the political language that fills the rest of the 41 minutes. They are not going to stop. And then they voted. I submitted my full report on day 43. Commander Vetherlin reviewed it. The 3 redacted sections are his. I disagreed with 2 of the 3 redactions, and said so in writing, and was told, in the polite language that superiors use when they are done discussing something, that my note had been received. I have since transmitted the unredacted version to the Concord Civilian Archive through channels I am not going to specify. This is a violation of my posting terms. I am including this admission in the log because Warrant Officer Solis was right about legibility. I don't want to hide either. Last thing, I kept the data chip she left. I have not opened it yet. I'm going to. I think what's on it is going to be very hard to read. I think it's going to be the kind of document that sits in you afterward and changes the shape of something. I think I've been not opening it because I have enough things sitting in me already, reshaping, but 400,000 names on a moon that had no strategic value I could identify. They painted the names on the hull. They broadcast the names on loop. They put the names in a treaty. The least I can do is read the rest of them.